Welcome to a deep dive, this idea of compositionality.
hmm
And this is going to be especially interesting for you, I think, because you're coming at this as a philosopher, already kind of deep into this stuff.
hmm
But have you ever thought about, like how we actually understand, an unlimited number of sentences? I mean, even right now, you're hearing this and understanding it, even though you've never heard these words, exactly in this order before.
Oh yeah, it's a question that's really fascinated thinkers for like centuries. Both philosophers and linguists. And one of the most powerful explanations we have is this idea, this principle of compositionality. Basically, it's the idea that the meaning of something complex, like a sentence, comes from the meanings of the individual parts and how those parts are combined.
So let's break that down. So it's not just like the words themselves; it's how they're put together.
Yeah, exactly. And we're drawing on the Stanford Encyclopedia philosophic entry on this, by the way, updated in 2020. Think of it like a recipe. You have your ingredients, right? The words. And then you have the instructions, which is the grammar. Combine them correctly, and boom, you get a meaningful sentence.
Oh, okay. So that's how we get, they call productivity in language. It's like our ability to understand sentences that we've never encountered before. So it's like our brains are following this recipe, combining, the words according to the grammatical instructions and creating this whole new dish.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And this recipe idea also helps explain what's called the systematicity of language.
Yeah.
So if you get the philosopher pondered the problem, you automatically understand, the problem puzzled the philosopher. Same ingredients, different arrangement, but the core meaning is still there. So this kind of logic, this inherent structure is key to how we handle this huge, this vastness of language.
But I mean, wouldn't that mean that like every sentence, can be broken down this way? Are there like any exceptions to the recipe?
Oh, that's a great question. And that's where things get even more interesting, especially from, I think a philosophical point of view,
Hmm.
because there are these elements that seem to challenge or at least complicate the neatness of compositionality.
Oh, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
So give me an example.
Okay, well, think about like idioms, those expressions where the meaning isn't really the sum of its parts. Like kick the bucket. I mean, nobody's literally kicking anything when they say that.
So idioms are like prepackaged meals then. You don't need to follow the recipe step by step. You just grab the whole thing and boom, you got the meaning.
Exactly. Now, some linguists would argue that idioms don't actually like break compositionality. They just function like single words with their own, weird meanings. But even then, they highlight that language isn't always straightforward.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about, words that change meaning based on the context? Like if I say that's heavy, it could mean a whole bunch of different things, if I'm talking about a book or a philosophical idea.
You've hit on another really crucial point, context dependence. So heavy has like a stable dictionary definition, right? But its meaning in a specific situation, what we call its occasion meaning, that shifts. So compositionality doesn't require words to have fixed meanings, but the meaning of the whole should come from the meaning of the parts, whatever those happen to be at that moment.
Okay, so compositionality can handle a little wiggle room. It's not like totally rigid.
Hmm.
But that makes me think, does this apply to all areas of language? Like what about something really complex like chess notation?
Ooh, that's a fascinating analogy.
Well-
So algebraic chess notation, while systematic, isn't purely compositional in the same way language is. Each symbol has a meaning, sure. But to understand a move like BB5 requires background knowledge of the game, the initial setup, the rules.
So it's not just the symbols on their own. You need like the whole context of the chessboard to understand it.
Precisely. This suggests that systems can be understandable and, follow rules without being strictly compositional in this way.
Man, this is really giving me a whole new appreciation, for how much is going on like under the surface every time we, speak or write. But if compositionality, isn't like a hard and fast rule, like why is it such a big deal in linguistics and in philosophy of language,
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it offers this like incredibly elegant framework for how we process language. It's almost too neat to be totally false.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like
Mhm.
if the language is built this way, even with some quirks, it tells us something really fundamental maybe about how thought works too. Right?
Well,
But are there other areas where compositionality, gets kind of tricky? I bet philosophers have a field day with this stuff.
Absolutely. One area that's caused a lot of debate is, the realm of what are called propositional attitudes, things like beliefs, desires, intentions. So let's take the terms, eye doctor and ophthalmologist. they refer to the same profession,
Well,
right?
yeah.
But here's where it gets
I have
interesting.
a feeling you're about to blow my mind.
Consider the sentences. Carla believes that eye doctors are rich, and Carla believes that ophthalmologists are rich. It's totally possible that Carla believes one but not the other, even though the words technically mean the same thing.
Wait, really? Why would that be? It seems like the meaning changes once we're talking about what's going on inside someone's head, you know?
Exactly. This suggests that the meaning of a sentence within a belief report isn't just about the parts and their arrangement. It also depends on Carla's understanding, the specific mental representations she has for those words.
So how do we square that, with the idea of compositionality? Does it mean we have to throw it out the window when we talk about beliefs?
Not necessarily. There are a couple different ways to approach this. Some argue that true synonymy is actually super rare,
Yeah.
maybe even non-existent in natural language. Others say that the apparent difference in meaning actually comes from what are called conversational implicatures. Things that are implied but not directly stated.
So we're back to the idea that context is super crucial.
It seems like we can't escape it, especially when we're dealing with these subtle shades of meaning, especially in beliefs and mental states. So this brings up an even bigger question. If we can't always rely on the strict compositionality of words and grammar, how do we achieve shared understanding at all?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. It's like we're using this intricate dance, between linguistic knowledge, like our understanding of words and grammar, and this idea of compositionality, along with this huge dose of contextual awareness. Things like shared background knowledge, common sense, and even our ability to guess what the speaker intended to communicate.
Precisely. Our brains are remarkably good at weaving together this linguistic and contextual information to make sense of what we hear and read. Compositionality might be the foundation, but context is the scaffolding that supports and shapes the final structure of meaning.
Wow, this deep dive has really stretched my brain in the best way possible.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, our exploration of this whole compositionality thing, what are some key takeaways, for our philosopher listener out there? What's the big picture here?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that compositionality, while powerful and often intuitive, isn't, a simple yes or no answer. It's more like a spectrum. Some aspects of language are very neatly compositional, while others are much more context dependent. And those, require us to think beyond just the literal meanings of words and grammar.
So it's a useful starting point, but not the whole story.
Exactly. Think of it like a map. A good map gives you the general lay of the land, but you still need to be aware of the actual terrain, the landmarks, and even your own intuition to really find your way around.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So we have this constant interplay between the systematic rule-based side of language and the fluid context-driven side. It's like this dance between logic and interpretation.
Precisely. And that interplay is what makes language both so fascinating and at times, frustratingly ambiguous.
It definitely keeps things interesting. What stands out to you, listeners, like the most intriguing aspect of compositionality? I'm particularly struck by this idea that if language is compositional, even with exceptions, does that hint at how our thoughts are structured? Are we limited to thinking in these sentence-like units even when we're not speaking?
That's a profound question, and one that, philosophers are still grappling with. And perhaps even more profoundly, if compositionality holds for language, could it also apply to thought itself? If our thoughts are structured like sentences with their meanings determined by the combination of simpler concepts, what implications might this have for our understanding of the mind?
Whoa, that's mind-blowing. If compositionality goes beyond language, it really reframes how we see the relationship between language, thought, and reality.
Indeed, and that's where philosophy comes in, exploring those very connections. Well, we'll have to leave our listener with that thought-provoking question to ponder. It's been fantastic having you join us on this deep dive into the world of compositionality.
And for those who want to go even deeper, we encourage you to check out the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on compositionality. It's a treasure trove of insights.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep diving deep.